And here we go. I'll share the deck after. So the topic was just for some context, there was some discussion about NetSuite, procurement, and Megan looped me in. And I think I just like made an offhand comment like, oh, I'm happy to chat about this. I literally could talk about this all day long. And so this became this session, and very excited to dive into financial operations. So a little bit of structure here, and we'll see how this goes. So first 10 minutes or so, I'll share a bit of a monologue, but I'll use that in air quotes because I still want you to jump in and talk about things as I go through these slides. I'll do a quick intro to the topic, why I think it's important. All views are my own here. And then we'll go into a little bit more double click into procurement, AP operations focus, and also what I and our company is seeing from leading companies, leading a little bit broad, but growing mostly technology companies, some health care companies, some government organizations as well. And the remaining time, really want to just dive into any working session topics, some process you're running, some data you're manually entering, some Excel sheet you still have to do a pivot table for. So really like hoping that everyone gets a little bit of value on their actual operations in this session today. So I thought, what better way to start off this session than to ask both Claude and ChatGPT what financial operations are. I don't know if you guys can see, maybe I'll go into, here's my hack for, without actually losing your faces up. You can go. So, okay, so here's what they said. I personally was actually surprised to see budgeting and forecasting upfront. Obviously, it does make sense, right? Because you need the data to go into these systems to get budgets and forecasts. But personally, I think of financial operations a little bit more on like getting the data and getting it in the right place. And then once you have the data, if it's all like data stuff like budgeting, forecasting, I think it's I don't know. Anyway, I think this is actually a pretty comprehensive overview of financial operations. I was a little bit surprised that ChatGPT left off AR, which I think is a huge part of financial operations. Obviously, there's cash management, but sometimes your revenue is not cash. So 1 point for Claude here on the definition side of things. But as you can see, like really broad categories and touching a lot of different places within finance and also non-finance. So what are we going to spend an hour doing here today? As I think about financial operations and what the goals are, I think there are three main things I prioritize. One is the timeliness, the trustworthiness of that process and data, and then finally, if it's actionable. And to achieve those goals, I actually think financial operations starts outside of finance. And what I mean by that is a lot of us work in technology companies where the engineering systems actually drive a lot of the revenue, customer metrics, other operations that impact finance. HR obviously has a huge impact with finance, with payroll, as well as contractor, other processes, sales and marketing ops, legal. And so this whole category of financial operations, I think is aligned with the theme of strategic finance and finance being more embedded and business partners rather than just receiving data and like bookkeeping data. And so I really think that financial operations, finance leaders, controllers, finance directors really should have an opinion and should be heard when these other systems are being designed in order to help optimize your financial processes to make sure that the data and actions are being able to be had in a timely way. All right. So, we had that long list from Claude and ChatGPT of what are we actually focusing on today. So for now, for this session, we're going to be focusing on how do you get more predictable profitability via the COGS and OPEX side of things. So expense management, financial reporting, audit and compliance on payments, I had financial reporting there. I was trying to piece two. I have two financial reportings. I'll change that. And then budgeting forecasting, because having that data accurate, timely, allows you to update your budget and forecasts for future periods too. One thing I'll caveat, as you've all seen, this topic is very broad. So we're gonna hold off on revenue operations today, mainly because we don't have focused sessions, and revenue operations really, I think, depends on what type of customer you have, how you collect your revenue. So a little bit more differentiated per company, whereas the expense side and the investment side is more similar. Of course, there's still nuances, but I think in general, more similar. So that's what we're going to focus on more today, but a lot of the themes can be applied to the revenue side as well. All right, so I have 3 slides on why it matters. I think the first one here is more quantitative, right? So you have scenario 1 where this company has $10 in revenue, they have $3 in COGS, $5 in OpEx, and $8 in profit. I did this late last night, so I hope the math is right. It'd be a little embarrassing if this math is wrong, but I think it's right. And so you have, 2 divided by 10, you have your 20% profit. And so scenario 2, you increase revenue by $1. In scenario 3, you decrease your OpEx, your spend, by $1, right? And the point I'm trying to make here is actually, if you look at just the dollar amount, it's not huge, especially with these really small numbers. But if you start to look at the percentages, they become quite large in both the percentage gain as well as the percentage point gain, right? So you have pretty big swings, and you have that ability, because that dollar in OpEx doesn't have to go through that, gross margin percentage. You have a direct translation to that profit gain. And I think that's where there is, just basic opportunity in getting visibility and I would not even trimming spend, but making sure that your OpEx spend is appropriate for your revenue, or having that not increase disproportionately to your revenue growth. And I am all for investing in the business. So don't take away like, hey, we shouldn't spend on OpEx. Obviously, we need to spend on OpEx. But the better grasp and the leaner we can be on OpEx, it translates directly to that profit percentage. All right, the second reason why it matters is you want to know what you're investing in to predict revenue. And I think there's some like branding and just naming of like AP, right? It doesn't feel like the most sexy thing in the world, but if you think of like investment management and investment allocation, that's really what the expense side of the house is. Like, you're deciding where you want to spend your money, when you want to spend it, how you want to spend it, and those investments should really be driving your revenue. We're not going to go into a lot of like model creation today, but in general, the best models I see have investments both in headcount and other items driving revenue versus revenue then driving how much you should spend. Because then how do you, like, where is that revenue coming from, right? How is that revenue predictable? So this is why it's huge to get visibility on your investments, both on the COGS side as well as OpEx, so that you can have a good grasp. And of course, there are definitely COGS that are a result of revenue too. But in general, I think the investments should drive the revenue, and the revenue should be an output of the model. All right, finally, why this matters is visibility goes to choice. And actually, this is the part where we do have a little bit on the supply diversity, right? There are many software vendors our companies are using today, which is great for efficiency and not having to build everything in-house. But that also then comes with the whole territory of managing risk, data sharing, what you're not sharing, when you're sharing it. Can you add on this new feature that gets this, benefit, but has other data sharing? So if you don't have visibility to what's coming up in your vendors, and your security team is like manually adding vendors to their spreadsheet because of what they've heard in the business or what they like see in Slack channels, that is a area of opportunity to automate that collection of vendor assessment, and also make sure that your IT risk teams are understanding what data you're sharing with your vendors. The second is contract and payment terms. If you're getting vendor notifications via their invoice, that's oftentimes too late to actually impact the contract for various clauses as well as your payment terms, right? So if you have visibility to that, then you have a choice and you have options to impact that before that vendor gets onboarded. And then finally, there are many here, but I'll just put for now, supply diversity, right? Like, hey, have you guys ever actually like looked at, hey, engineering team, did you actually look at 2 vendors, or did you just like go with this one? And why did you go with this one? And what are any sort of ESG metrics, or what does the leadership team look like? What does the company look like? Who are their investors? And so getting that visibility again leads to choice in suppliers and who you're partnering with and who you're spending money with in the business. So that's my third thing on why this all matters. So as I take a perspective of these goals with the expense lens, here are some things that that fall into each of these categories. So on timeliness, like you need to know what expenses are coming. It's great if you know at the invoice point before the payment goes out. You probably have to know at the invoice point because you have to sign off on the payment, but you should really know at the contract point or when the department is even signing up for that vendor. Trustworthiness, the data needs to be accurate from the accounting side and also for the the request, and then actionable, can you actually do this? And so what I see and what, when we work with companies, when I've worked with prior companies, some of the most common challenges and problems I've seen on the first part is little to no visibility on signed contracts. They're not in a single repository. It's not searchable. There's no real process to get you visibility. And getting this random invoice for $50K is the first time I've heard of that vendor. And that's just not okay in this day and age with all the other goals we talked about. The second part on the trustworthiness, historical data doesn't actually have the granular bookkeeping allocations or accruals to support your decisions. And it's no one's fault, but we can't expect accountants and the controller to know all the context, right? There has to be that two-way communication so that the data can be accurate. And then finally, is there missing context? Do you even know even if you know this vendor is coming, do you know the business justification, who the owner is, manager approvals, different context to help you make a better decision about that vendor? And so all of that is say, this is why personally, I've really shifted my career from just being, VP finance leadership to actually working on procurement, because I think there's a huge opportunity with technology and also with how finance and procurement are working with the business. So what can better procurement get you? More visibility to upcoming expenses with completeness of information, really being able to capture that information up front so the right stakeholders can make the best decisions, better workflows between business partners, finance, legal, IT, security, etc. Less time on admin work by all of these teams when that's consolidated and when the questions have been thought through beforehand. I think this one's the third bullet point here: faster and more accurate month-end close for both the accounting team and the FP&A team. Obviously benefits, especially with this group, you all know, obvious benefits for yourself as well as the CFO and the executive team to get that data up front. You don't want to be spending the precious hours and days post month end chasing down people in the business, asking what this vendor is for, did we get invoiced for this or that? A lot of that can be done throughout the month and through the procurement process. And then finally, of course, getting that visibility, you can actually negotiate better, have more savings, have opportunities to reject new vendors if the business doesn't need those vendors. All right. So with that, what I'm, these days I am working with quite a few procurement teams, as well as finance directors, financial systems managers, as well, and accounting directors, chief accounting officers. So folks within those professions. And so here's what I'm seeing: a simple intake form for all departments, having conditional questions on spend intake, different approval workflows for spend type. So, looping in the right people at the right time, Budget approval checks by FP&A, not all self-reported. If you ask the business if they've gotten budget approval, everyone will say they've gotten budget approval, and there's really no tracking to an actual spreadsheet or actual model. The right coding, we've talked about this already. API integrations to CLMs, legal, IT after budget approval. Legal time is precious. IT time is precious. You don't want to be wasting time for these teams reviewing a contract if you haven't even signed off on the budget yet, right? So really being aware of the resources internally and how to best allocate that time. Easy to communicate and comment, and then two-way match when invoices come in. There are many more best practices, so I want to make sure we leave time to talk about actually specific parts of the workflow and deep dive. But here, some general themes, and of course, you can use any Google form, platform, email process you want. I think the key point is like setting up a good process, but I did take conveniently some screenshots from my platform to showcase some of these things. And so having one place where you can set up the intake form, having conditional questions. So like if you have AI in the software you're trying to use, then you should get more questions automatically. But if you're saying, hey, this is a lunch caterer, or this is something that will have no AI interaction, then skip those next 10 questions, right? So being able to customize that form conditionally. Then on the stakeholder side, looping in different approvals when needed for different types of spend and renewal. This is leveraging technology. It doesn't have to be pseudo at all. Like any technology to automate this type of routing is going to be more efficient and give you more time to spend on the end result of that data rather than looping in people into emails and forwarding emails along. Documenting, so this both for compliance as well as for confidence in a decision. So having that documented approval be there, getting the GL coding right before the vendor gets onboarded, integrating or just looping in legal after budget is approved, and communicating with stakeholders. I think a lot of times there's like an email chain that's left, someone forgot to reply, and like there's a side conversation in Slack. And so really being able to have that completeness of information and looping it back into all the key stakeholders. And then finally, further downstream, like when that invoice does come in, how can we link it up with that approved procurement request or that PO, if you do create a PO, in a way that automates that downstream accounting, line creation, all that workflow. Okay, so I just said a lot. Let's loop back to the top of the call of like what these two great systems said financial operations are. And what I've done in green here is like everything we just talked about so far, I believe strongly it links to those green items. The white ones, yes, you can make an argument. Like we do have, we definitely see companies running contractor approvals, professional service approvals, and you can extend payroll to those types of people as well. So there are some stretches on the payroll and tax side, but outside of that, I think these other core elements of financial operations, procurement absolutely touches and impacts in a way that can help make your organization more efficient. And I think that's my last slide. So I'm going to stop presenting here. I'm also going to stop recording so we can talk about our own nitty-gritty issues on procurement or anything.